The town of Willow Creek, Montana, sat like a forgotten scar on the face of the earth, hemmed in by jagged mountains that clawed at the sky. It was a place where dust settled on everything: the wooden storefronts, the people's dreams, and most of all, on hope itself. In the late autumn of 1887, when the wind carried the bite of coming winter down from the peaks, the town's 500 souls went about their business with the grim determination of those who had nowhere else to go. Jesse McCrae lived 3 miles outside town, where the land turned from merely unforgiving to downright hostile. His ranch, if one could call the collection of weathered buildings and stubborn fence posts a ranch, crouched against a hillside like it was trying to hide from the world. And perhaps it was, just as Jesse himself had been hiding for the past 5 years. The war had ended over 2 decades ago, but for Jesse, it had never truly stopped. The Confederate shrapnel that had torn through the left side of his face had left a map of raised, twisted flesh from temple to jaw. His left eye, miraculously spared, peered out from the wreckage like a blue flame refusing to be extinguished. The same explosion that had marked his face had shattered his left leg below the knee, leaving him with a pronounced limp that made his gait as distinctive as a signature. On this particular morning, Jesse stood at his porch, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. His coffee had gone cold in his hand, but he didn't notice. He rarely noticed such things anymore. The isolation had become both his fortress and his prison, keeping the world at bay while slowly suffocating whatever remained of the man he'd once been. In town, the morning ritual at Garrison's General Store was already underway. Men gathered around the pot-bellied stove, sharing gossip and complaints with equal fervor. Frank Slater held court among them, his thick fingers wrapped around a whiskey glass despite the early hour. As the owner of the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, Frank commanded attention whether he deserved it or not. "Saw McCrae's fence is down again on the north pasture," drawled Pete Hutchins, one of Frank's ranch hands. "Man can barely keep 20 head of cattle alive, let alone run a proper spread." Frank's laugh was like gravel being ground under a boot heel. "That's what happens when you send a cripple to do a man's work. Should have stayed buried with the rest of the Confederate trash where he belongs." The other men shifted uncomfortably. Most had fought in the war themselves, on one side or the other, and such talk still had the power to resurrect old ghosts. But none would challenge Frank Slater. His money talked louder than conscience in Willow Creek. "You know what that scarred-up hermit needs?" Frank continued, warming to his theme. "A woman. Someone to look at that monster face of his and run screaming back to civilization. Might finally convince him to sell that worthless piece of dirt he's squatting on." The idea took root in Frank's whiskey-soaked brain like a weed in fertile soil. By noon, he'd gathered 3 of his most loyal men, Pete Hutchins, Dale Morrison, and Will Thornton, in the back room of the saloon. "Here's what we're going to do," Frank said, spreading out a newspaper from Denver. "See these advertisements? Mail-order brides, desperate women looking for husbands out west. We're going to get one for our friend Jesse." The men exchanged glances. "Frank," Will ventured carefully, "Jesse ain't looking for no wife. Man barely speaks to anyone." "That's exactly the point." Frank's grin revealed teeth stained yellow by tobacco. "We write the letters, send the money for passage. When she gets here and sees what she signed up for, that scarred face, that broken-down ranch, she'll be on the next stage out. The whole town will see Jesse McCrae for what he really is, a pathetic cripple that no woman would have." 2,000 miles away in Topeka, Kansas, Clara Whitmore sat in the bare room she rented above Morrison's bakery, reading a letter for the 5th time. The paper trembled slightly in her hands, though whether from cold or emotion, she couldn't say. The room's single window looked out on an alley where garbage collected in corners and hope seemed as scarce as the coins in her purse. At 26, Clara had already lived through more disappointment than some saw in a lifetime. Her father's death when she was 14 had left her and her mother to fight off creditors and worse. She'd worked in factories, taken in washing, done whatever honest labor would keep them fed. When consumption had claimed her mother 2 years ago, Clara had thought things couldn't get worse. Then came Thomas Hartwell, with his easy smile and easier promises. He'd courted her properly, spoken of marriage and a little house near the railway where he worked. She'd dared to dream again, right up until the night she'd found him at the gambling tables, drunk and boasting about how he'd bet his fiancée's virtue on a hand of cards. She'd fled before learning whether he'd won or lost, but the betrayal had cut deeper than any physical wound. Now, with her savings nearly gone and winter approaching, the letter in her hand seemed like either salvation or damnation. Maybe both. "Dear Miss Whitmore," it read in careful, slightly cramped handwriting. "Your response to my advertisement was most welcome. As I mentioned, I'm a rancher in Montana, seeking a wife to share my life. I must be honest, I am not a young man, and the war left its marks upon me, but I have land, cattle, and a strong pair of hands. I can offer you a home and honest work, if not luxury. If you are still willing, I have enclosed funds for your passage. I await your arrival with hope. Respectfully, Jesse McCrae." Clara touched the banknotes tucked behind the letter. It was more money than she'd seen in months, enough for a train ticket to Montana, with some left over, or enough to survive another month or two in Topeka, watching her options dwindle with each passing day. She made her decision that night, packing her few belongings into a carpet bag that had been her mother's. 4 dresses, a Bible, her mother's silver brush, and a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the remnants of a life that hadn't turned out as planned, she sold or gave away. 3 days later, she stood on the platform as the westbound train wheezed to life. No one was there to see her off, which seemed fitting somehow. She was leaving nothing behind but disappointment and starting towards something that couldn't possibly be worse. Or so she told herself as the Kansas prairie began to roll past the window, each mile taking her further from the familiar and closer to a future she couldn't imagine. The journey took 5 days. Clara watched the landscape change from the gentle hills of Kansas to the dramatic peaks of Montana. The train grew less crowded as they moved west, until she was one of only a handful of passengers who disembarked at the Willow Creek station. The moment she stepped onto the platform, she knew she'd entered another world. The air was thinner here, sharp with a scent of pine and something wild she couldn't name. Mountains surrounded the town like fortress walls, their peaks already white with early snow. A small crowd had gathered at the station, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. Clara noticed the way they whispered among themselves, eyes darting between her and something beyond the platform. Their expressions reminded her of spectators at a cockfight, eager for blood sport. "You'd be Miss Whitmore." The station master, a thin man with the nervous eyes, approached her carefully. "Come for Jesse McCrae?" "Yes," Clara said, lifting her chin. Something in their collective gaze made her want to stand taller. "I'm expected." "Oh, you're expected all right," someone muttered, followed by a ripple of suppressed laughter. The station master had the grace to look ashamed. I'll send word out to the McCrae place, though Lord knows if he'll come." He paused, seemed about to say more, then simply gestured toward the town. "Hotel's that way if you need to wait. Garrison's store is across from it if you need supplies." Clara gathered her carpetbag and trunk, ignoring the stares that followed her progress down Main Street. The town was smaller than she'd expected, more raw. The buildings looked temporary, as if the people who'd built them hadn't been entirely convinced they'd stay. At the hotel, a 2-story structure that leaned slightly to the east, the clerk's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline when she gave her name. "Here for Jesse McCrae. Are you—" He shook his head slowly. "Miss, I don't know what you've been told, but I've been told I have a room reserved." Clara interrupted, her patience wearing thin. "Is that correct or not?" He handed her a key without another word, though she could feel his gaze following her up the stairs. In the small room, she sat on the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to wonder what she'd gotten herself into. The townspeople's reactions, their mix of pity and anticipation, suggested something more than simple small-town curiosity. Outside her window, the sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. Somewhere out there, Jessie McCrae was receiving word of her arrival. Tomorrow, she would meet the man whose letters had painted a picture of loneliness that had echoed her own. Whatever marks the war had left on him, whatever made the townspeople look at her with such knowing eyes, couldn't be worse than the slow death of working herself into an early grave in Topeka. At least, that's what Clara told herself as darkness fell over Willow Creek, and the mountains seemed to lean in closer, as if eager to witness what would come next. The morning sun had barely crested the mountains when Clara heard the wagon wheels grinding against the dirt road outside. She'd been awake since before dawn, pressing her best dress, a simple navy wool that had seen better days but still held its shape. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her dark hair into a practical bun. Through the thin hotel walls, she could hear the excited murmur of voices gathering on the street below. When she descended the stairs, carpetbag in hand, she found what seemed like half the town assembled on the boardwalk. The wagon sat in the middle of the street, its driver nowhere to be seen. Then she spotted him, a tall figure standing in the shadows cast by the general store's awning. His face turned away from the crowd. "Mr. McCrae?" Clara's voice carried clearly across the morning air. The figure stiffened, then slowly turned. Clara heard the collective intake of breath from the onlookers, saw several women raise hands to their mouths. She kept her eyes fixed on the man who must be Jessie McCrae, refusing to give the crowd the reaction they clearly expected. The left side of his face was a landscape of scars, the skin pulled taut and shiny in places, rippled like disturbed water in others. His left eye, startlingly blue against the damaged flesh, watched her with the wariness of a wounded animal. He stood favoring his right leg, his broad shoulders held rigidly, as if braced for a blow. Clara walked forward steadily, her boots clicking against the wooden boardwalk. When she reached him, she extended her hand. "I'm Clara Whitmore. Thank you for coming to meet me." Jessie stared at her outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it briefly in his own calloused palm. "Ma'am?" His voice was rough with disuse. There's been a mistake." "Oh?" Clara kept her tone neutral, though she was acutely aware of their audience. I never sent for—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "This was someone's idea of a joke. I'll pay for your return passage. You can catch the afternoon train." Behind them, someone snickered. Clara saw Jessie's shoulders tense further, saw the shame that flickered across the undamaged side of his face. In that moment, she understood. The letters, the money. Someone had set them both up for humiliation. "I see." Clara adjusted her grip on the carpetbag. "Well, Mr. McCrae, I've come a long way. The least you could do is offer me breakfast before sending me back." Confusion replaced the shame in his expression. "Breakfast? Unless Montana hospitality is different from what I'm used to. It's customary to feed travelers who've journeyed 5 days to reach your door." She kept her voice light, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than standing before an audience hungry for drama. Jessie glanced around at the watching crowd, then back at her. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or a flicker of respect. "The ranch is 3 miles out. Road's rough. I've survived rougher." He studied her for another moment, then nodded toward the wagon. Without ceremony, he took her trunk and loaded it onto the back, his movements efficient despite his limp. Clara climbed up onto the bench seat without waiting for assistance, settling her skirts around her. As Jessie took up the reins, Frank Slater emerged from the saloon, his cronies flanking him. Well, ain't this touching? Beauty and the—" "Mr. Slater." Clara's voice cut through his words like a blade. "I don't believe we've been introduced, yet you seem terribly interested in my affairs. In Kansas, we call that poor manners. Perhaps standards are different here?" Frank's face reddened. Several townspeople tried to hide smiles behind their hands. Jessie made a sound that might have been a cough or suppressed laughter as he clicked to the horses. The wagon lurched forward, leaving Frank standing in the dust. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creak of wheels and the steady clop of hooves. Clara took in the landscape, wilder and more beautiful than she'd imagined, with mountains rising like cathedral spires against the crystal sky. Despite everything, she felt something ease in her chest. There was freedom in all this space. "Why didn't you run?" Jesse's question came suddenly, his voice gruff. Clara considered her answer. "Should I have?" "Most would have. Seeing—" He gestured vaguely toward his face. "I've seen worse things than scars. Mr. McCrae." He made that sound again. Definitely a laugh this time, though rusty from disuse. "Have you now? My mother died of consumption. Have you ever watched someone you love drown in their own lungs? Mr. McCrae? That's ugly. Scars are just proof of survival." Jesse fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence. Less defensive, more thoughtful. As they turned off the main road onto a narrower track, he began pointing out landmarks. "That's Watson spread to the east. Good people. Mostly keep to themselves. Creek runs along our northern border, Silver Creek, though there's no silver in it. Just iron pyrite that fools greenhorns." The ranch, when it came into view, was exactly what Clara had expected from a man living alone in self-imposed exile. The main house was solid enough, built from logs that had weathered to silver gray, but everything showed signs of neglect. Fences sagged, the barn door hung crooked, and weeds choked what might once have been a kitchen garden. Jesse pulled up in front of the house, his movements suddenly awkward. "It's not much. I should take you back to town. This was a cruel joke, and you shouldn't have to—" "Mr. McCrae." Clara climbed down from the wagon, not waiting for help. "I'm hungry, tired, and dusty. If you're going to send me away, at least have the courtesy to do it after I've had coffee and something to eat." She marched toward the front door, leaving Jesse to follow or not as he chose. After a moment, she heard his uneven gait behind her. The interior was Spartan, but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. A narrow staircase led to what she assumed was a loft bedroom. Everything was functional. Nothing more. The home of a man who'd forgotten that living involved more than mere survival. Clara removed her gloves and bonnet, hanging them on a peg by the door as if she'd done it 100 times before. "Where do you keep the coffee?" Jesse stood in his own doorway like a visitor. "Upper shelf, left of the stove, but—" She was already moving, finding the coffee tin and a reasonably clean pot. As she worked, Jesse remained frozen by the door, watching her with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been wonder. "Eggs?" she asked. "Bacon?" Yes, smokehouse out back for the bacon. Hens are somewhere. They roost in the barn mostly." Clara turned to face him fully. "Mr. McCrae, I've been living in a single room above a bakery in Topeka, working 16-hour days in a factory that made my eyes burn and my fingers bleed. Before that, I watched my mother die by inches while creditors circled like vultures. I've had a man I trusted try to sell my virtue over a card game. So please, stop looking at me like I'm made of spun glass. If you want me gone, I'll go. But first, we're going to have a civilized meal like human beings. Agreed?" Jesse blinked, then slowly removed his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with premature gray. "Agreed." While Clara cooked, Jesse found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. Talking. She had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like prying. He found himself telling her about the ranch's better days, when his father had run cattle here before the war, about the challenges of working the land alone with his limitations. 20 head isn't much, he admitted as they sat across from each other at the rough pine table. "But it's what I can manage. Market's been good enough to keep me going." "Could do better with help," Clara observed, cutting into her eggs. "Can't afford help." "What about a partner?" Jesse's fork stilled. "Ma'am, Miss Whitmore, you don't understand. Whoever wrote those letters sent that money. They did it to humiliate us both. You seem like a decent woman. You shouldn't be mixed up in this." Clara set down her coffee cup with a decisive click. "Mr. McCrae, let me be clear. I'm 26 years old, nearly penniless, with no family and no prospects. I came here because even a cruel joke seemed better than slowly starving in Kansas. Now I find a man who speaks to me honestly, owns his own land, and makes no improper advances despite finding a strange woman in his home. Frankly, I've encountered far worse prospects." Jessie stared at her. "You can't be serious." "Why not? You need help with the ranch. I need a place to live. I can cook, clean, tend a garden, mend clothes, and I'm not afraid of hard work. We could have an arrangement, a business partnership, if you will. And when the whole town laughs at you for keeping company with a scarred cripple," Clara's eyes flashed, "then I'll know exactly what kind of small-minded fools they are. Mr. McCrae, I've been looked down on my whole life for being poor, for being female, for working with my hands instead of sitting prettily in a parlor. What makes you think I care what a bunch of gossips say?" Before Jessie could respond, the sound of horses reached them. Through the window, they could see a group of riders approaching, Frank Slater and his men, no doubt come to witness the culmination of their joke. Jessie's face shuddered. "I'll send them away." "No." Clara stood, smoothing her skirts. "Let them come. I have a few things to say to Mr. Slater." Jessie looked at her, this slight woman with steel in her spine and fire in her dark eyes, and felt something he'd thought dead stir in his chest. It might have been hope, or it might have been fear. Perhaps they were the same thing. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll face them together." Clara nodded, moving to stand beside him as the riders drew closer. Whatever happened next, she'd made her choice. After years of running from one disaster to the next, she was ready to stand and fight, even if it meant standing beside a scarred stranger against the mockery of an entire town. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the ranch yard as Frank Slater and his men arrived, eager to witness the misery they'd orchestrated. They had no idea they were about to meet a force more formidable than any they'd reckoned with, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Clara woke before dawn, as had become her habit in the 2 weeks since arriving at the ranch. She moved quietly through the house, starting the fire in the cook stove and setting coffee to brew. Jessie would be up soon. She'd learned his routines quickly. He rose early, worked until his leg couldn't bear more, then found other tasks that could be done sitting. She'd moved into the small room off the kitchen without fanfare, ignoring Jessie's protests that she should take the loft. "Your leg doesn't need to manage those stairs more than necessary," she'd said firmly, ending the discussion. It was typical of how things had gone between them, a careful dance of politeness and distance, even as she quietly began transforming his house into something resembling a home. This morning, she had bread rising and was heading out to gather eggs when she heard Jessie's uneven step on the stairs. He paused in the doorway, as he did every morning, as if surprised to find her there. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Coffee's ready." Clara pulled her shawl tighter against the morning chill. "I'll have breakfast ready when you come back from checking the cattle." It had become their routine. He'd check the small herd while she prepared breakfast. Then they'd eat together before tackling the day's work. They spoke of practical matters, which section of fence needed mending, whether the pregnant cow looked ready to calve, if they had enough hay stored for winter. Safe topics that skirted around the growing awareness between them. Clara had just returned with the eggs when she heard Jessie shout. She dropped the basket and ran toward the sound, finding him on the ground near the barn. His face twisted in pain. "Damned gopher hole!" he ground out through clenched teeth. "Leg went out from under me." Clara knelt beside him, her hands moving efficiently over his leg, checking for breaks. "Seems to be just twisted. Can you stand if I help?" "I can manage. Jessie McCrae, stop being a fool and let me help you." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and they both noticed. Something shifted in the air between them. Together, they got him standing. Jesse leaned heavily on her, his arm around her shoulders, and Clara was acutely aware of his solid warmth against her side. They made their slow way back to the house, where she insisted he sit while she examined his leg properly. "You need to rest it," she said, rolling down his trouser leg with clinical efficiency, though her cheeks were warm. "No arguing. The fence in the south pasture will still be there tomorrow." Clara stood, brushing off her skirts. "I can handle the essential chores today." Jesse's jaw tightened. "I won't have you doing my work because I'm too clumsy to watch where I step." Clara turned on him, weeks of careful distance suddenly evaporating. "And I won't have you making an injury worse out of pure stubborn pride. I came here to be a partner, didn't I? Partners help each other. Or was that just pretty talk?" They stared at each other, the air crackling with more than anger. Jesse was the first to look away. "I'm not used to accepting help." "I know." Clara's voice softened. "Neither am I. Maybe we could learn together." The rest of the day passed differently, with Jesse forced to rest. He watched Clara work, really watched her for the first time. Saw how she moved with quiet efficiency, never complaining even when the work was hard. How she hummed under her breath when she thought he couldn't hear. How the afternoon sun caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair. That evening, as rain began to patter against the windows, Clara brought out a bottle she'd found in the back of a cupboard. "Medicinal purposes," she said with a slight smile, pouring amber liquid into 2 glasses. "For your leg." "Just my leg?" Jesse accepted the glass, something like humor flickering in his eyes. "Well, perhaps a bit for the nerves, too." Clara settled in the chair across from him, closer to the fire. The whiskey burned pleasantly down her throat. "Tell me about before." "Before?" "Before this." She gestured around the room. "You weren't always alone here." Jesse was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant. "My father built this place in '61, right before I enlisted. I was 19, full of fire about states' rights and honor. Fool kid stuff." He took another sip. "Came back in '65 to find him dead 2 years and the ranch falling apart. Mother had passed when I was young. So it was just me. You rebuilt it alone?" "What else was there to do? The war was over, but I was still fighting it every night in my dreams. Every time I closed my eyes. I was back in Tennessee, watching my unit get torn apart by artillery. Watching the man who was supposed to guard our flank count his gold instead." His hand unconsciously moved to his scarred face. "Found out later he'd sold our position to the Union forces. 30 pieces of silver, just like Judas." Clara refilled both their glasses. "Is he the one who—" "Frank Slater's cousin. Died before I could confront him about it. But Frank knows the truth. Knows his family's money came from blood. He's hated me ever since I came back and told anyone who'd listen." Jesse's laugh was bitter. "Not that many listened to a scarred Confederate veteran. Easier to believe I was making excuses for losing a battle." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the rain intensify. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and Clara shivered despite the fire's warmth. "Storm's getting worse," Jesse observed. "That roof in your room still sound?" As if in answer, they heard the distinct plop of water hitting wood. Clara sighed. "I'll get a bucket." But when she returned from placing the bucket under the leak, Jesse was struggling to his feet. "Can't leave you in a leaking room." "Take the loft tonight. I'll manage down here." "Don't be ridiculous. Your leg needs proper rest. Not a night on the floor." Clara bit her lip, then made a decision. "The bed up there is big enough. We can share it, properly, with a blanket between us. We're both adults, and it's just for tonight." Jesse's face went very still. "Clara, that's not— People already talk. Let them—" She met his gaze steadily. "I trust you. Jesse, do you trust me?" The question hung between them, loaded with more meaning than the simple words conveyed. Finally, Jesse nodded slowly. "I trust you." Getting Jesse up the stairs with his injured leg proved challenging. By the time they reached the loft, both were breathless from the effort. Clara pointedly turned her back while Jessie prepared for bed, busying herself with creating a barrier down the middle of the mattress with a rolled quilt. When she turned back, Jessie was already under the covers on his side, his scarred profile turned away from her. Clara slipped into her side of the bed, acutely aware of his presence despite the barrier between them. The storm raged outside, lightning illuminating the room in brief flashes. Neither spoke, but Clara could tell from his breathing that Jessie was as awake as she was. "I was engaged once," she said quietly into the darkness. "Thomas Hartwell, handsome, charming, said all the right things. I thought I loved him." She felt Jessie shift slightly, listening. "The night I found him at Murphy's gambling house, he was drunk, laughing with his friends about how he'd bet my virtue on a hand of cards. Said I was uptight anyway, that maybe losing would loosen me up." Her voice remained steady, but her hands clenched the blanket. "I left that night, took what little money I had and ran. Never found out if he won or lost that hand." "Clara," Jessie's voice was rough. "I'm sorry. I'm not anymore. It taught me to see past pretty words and handsome faces." She turned her head, able to make out his silhouette in the darkness. "Taught me that real worth has nothing to do with what's on the surface." The lightning flashed again, and she saw he'd turned toward her, the blanket barrier suddenly seeming insignificant. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "Neither are you." They lay there, separated by inches in propriety, while the storm gradually moved on, just as Clara was finally drifting towards sleep. She felt Jessie's hand find hers across the divide. His fingers were calloused and warm, and they held on like she was anchoring him to something he'd thought lost forever. Neither spoke of it in the morning. Jessie's leg was better, and he insisted on returning to work despite Clara's protests. But something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful distance was gone, replaced by something warmer, more dangerous. Clara found herself watching him throughout the day, the way his shoulders moved as he worked, how his rare smiles transformed his face, scarred and unscarred alike. She caught him watching her too, his gaze following her as she went about her tasks. That evening, as she served dinner, their hands brushed as he took his plate. Both froze for a moment, the simple contact electric. Jessie pulled back first, but his eyes remained on hers. "Thank you," he said, and she knew he meant for more than just the meal. "You're welcome," she replied, meaning more than just the food as well. Outside, the sky was clear after the storm, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the small house that was starting to feel like home, two damaged souls continued their careful dance towards something that might be healing, might be love, or might be both. The quilt barrier hadn't been mentioned again, but both knew it wouldn't be there the next time storms drove them together. Some walls, once brought down, couldn't be rebuilt. And perhaps, Clara thought as she watched Jessie's profile in the lamplight, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. The morning held a crisp edge that spoke of winter's approach. Jessie saddled 2 horses while Clara packed provisions into saddlebags: jerky, hardtack, water, and ammunition for the rifle. They were heading into the foothills to hunt. The smokehouse was running low, and fresh meat would see them through the coming cold months. "You sure about this?" Jessie asked as Clara swung up into the saddle with practiced ease. In the month since she'd arrived, she'd taken to riding like she'd been born to it. "Unless you plan to eat nothing but beans all winter," Clara replied, adjusting her split skirt, a practical garment she'd fashioned from one of her old dresses. "Besides, I told you I can shoot. My father taught me before he died." They rode out as the sun painted the mountain peaks gold, following a deer trail Jessie knew well. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills covered in sage and bunch grass, stands of pine and aspen showing their autumn colors. Clara found herself breathing deeper, feeling the last of her city tensions falling away. "Beautiful country," she murmured, pulling her horse alongside Jessie's. "Gets into your bones," Jessie agreed, his eyes scanning the terrain with the automatic vigilance of someone who'd learned hard lessons about watching his surroundings. First time I saw these mountains, I knew I'd never leave. They rode in comfortable silence, communicating with gestures as they tracked. Jesse pointed out signs, disturbed earth where deer had pawed for food, fresh droppings, branches broken at shoulder height. Clara absorbed it all, quick to learn as always. It was past noon when they spotted the small herd of elk grazing in a meadow below them. Jesse dismounted, gesturing for Clara to do the same. They tethered the horses and crept forward, using a cluster of boulders for cover. "Take your time," Jesse whispered, handing her the rifle. "Breathe steady. Aim just behind the shoulder." Clara settled the rifle against her shoulder, sighting down the barrel. The elk were perhaps 60 yards away, an easy shot if she kept calm. She could feel Jesse close beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. The shot, when it came, was clean. The elk dropped instantly while the others scattered. Jesse's hand briefly squeezed her shoulder. "Well done." They worked together to field dress the animal, Jesse teaching her the proper way to preserve the hide and meat. It was messy work, but Clara never flinched. When they finished, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. "We'll need to camp," Jesse decided. Too much weight for the horses to make it back in the dark. They found a sheltered spot near a stream, with good sight lines and protection from the wind, while Jesse tended the horses and hung their meat high enough to keep it from predators. Clara gathered wood for a fire. Soon they had a comfortable camp, with bedrolls laid out and coffee brewing. As darkness fell and the stars emerged in brilliant display, they sat side by side near the fire. Clara had never seen stars like this, so many that the sky seemed more light than dark. "In Kansas, you can't see half this many," she said softly. "Too much smoke from the factories. One of the reasons I stay," Jesse replied. "Out here, a man can breathe, can think." Clara turned to study his profile in the firelight. The scars were less noticeable in this light, or perhaps she'd simply stopped seeing them as anything but part of him. "Do you ever get lonely?" "Used to. All the time." He met her gaze. "Not so much lately." The air between them crackled with more than just fire sparks. Clara felt her heart racing as Jesse reached out, his fingers gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered, cupping her cheek. "Clara," he said, voice rough. "I'm no good at pretty words. Never was, even before." He gestured vaguely at his face. "But you need to know. You've brought something back to life in me, something I thought was dead and buried." "Jesse," Clara breathed, leaning into his touch. "I've got no right to ask anything of you." He continued. "You came here because of a cruel joke. You could do so much better than a broken-down soldier with more scars than sense." Clara caught his hand in both of hers. "Stop. Just stop." Her voice was fierce. "You're the first truly decent man I've ever known. You're kind and honest and gentle, and you work harder than any two men despite your leg. You think I care about scars? You think I'd rather have some smooth-talking gambler who'd sell me for a good hand of cards?" "Clara." She silenced him by pressing her lips to his. For a moment, Jesse froze. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close. The kiss was tentative at first, then deeper. Years of loneliness and longing poured into the connection between them. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Jesse's eyes were wide with wonder. Clara, I don't know how to be what you deserve." "Then we'll learn together," she whispered. "Just like everything else." They kissed again, longer this time, hands beginning to explore. Clara felt like she was burning from the inside out, every nerve alive with sensation. When Jesse's lips moved to her neck, she gasped, fingers tightening in his hair. "Clara," he murmured against her skin. I should." "Should what?" She pulled back to look at him. "Should stop? Should pretend we don't both want this? You deserve proper courting, a church wedding. Not this." He gestured at their rough camp. Clara laughed, the sound slightly breathless. "Jesse McCrae. We're living together unmarried in a house 3 miles from town. I gave up proper the moment I decided to stay. I'm here because I choose to be, because I choose you. Something broke in Jesse's expression then, the last walls crumbling. He pulled her to him again, and this time there was no hesitation. They came together with desperate hunger, hands fumbling with buttons and laces, needing to be closer, to feel skin against skin. Clara had thought she understood what passed between men and women. Thomas had stolen kisses, pressed for more, but she'd always felt like prey being cornered. This was different. This was coming home. Jesse's hands were reverent as they mapped her body, treating her like something precious despite the fire burning in his eyes. When they joined at last, Clara bit her lip to keep from crying out. Jesse went still, his forehead pressed to hers. "Did I hurt you?" "No," she whispered. "No, just give me a moment." He held her close, whispering endearments against her hair until she began to move against him. Then thought fled entirely, leaving only sensation and need and the ancient rhythm of two becoming one. Afterward, they lay entwined under the blanket, skin cooling in the night air. Clara traced the scars on Jesse's chest, more evidence of the war that had tried to break him. He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Jesse was quiet for a long moment. "That I must be dreaming, that I'll wake up alone again, and this will have been just another way my mind tortures me." Clara propped herself up on an elbow, looking down at him with fierce determination. "You're not dreaming. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Do you hear me, Jesse McCrae? You're stuck with me now." He pulled her down for another kiss, slow and thorough. When they parted, his eyes held something she'd never seen there before. Hope, pure and unguarded. They made love again as the fire burned low, taking time to learn each other's responses. What brought pleasure? What brought joy? Jesse worshipped her body with an intensity that left Clara shaking, understanding for the first time why women risked everything for this connection. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they finally slept, curled together like puzzle pieces that had finally found their match. The horses nickered softly. The stream gurgled its endless song, and the mountains stood sentinel over two souls who had found healing in each other's arms. When they woke, Jesse seemed shy again, uncertain, but Clara would have none of it. She kissed him thoroughly before rising to dress, moving with new confidence in her body. "No regrets?" Jesse asked as they broke camp. "Only that we waited so long," Clara replied, swinging up into her saddle. The ride back to the ranch was different. They rode closer, hands brushing when the trail allowed. Jesse pointed out places he'd like to show her. A swimming hole for summer, a meadow that exploded with wildflowers in spring. Future plans. Clara realized. He was thinking in terms of seasons to come, years to share. As the ranch came into view, Jesse suddenly reined in his horse. "Clara, I should speak to the preacher, make this proper." She smiled at him, this good man who worried about her reputation even after the night they'd shared. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that." His answering smile transformed his face, and Clara's heart clenched with the knowledge that this scarred, gentle warrior was hers, just as she was his. Whatever battles lay ahead, with the ranch, with the town, with their own damaged pasts, they would face them together. The sun climbed higher as they rode home, the elk meat secured, their hearts finally unburdened. In the kitchen that evening, as Clara prepared their supper and Jesse repaired tack at the table, they moved around each other with new awareness, sharing glances and brief touches that promised more when darkness fell again. They were no longer two wounded souls hiding from the world. They were partners in truth now, in body as well as spirit, building something worth fighting for in this wild, unforgiving land that had somehow given them both a second chance at love. The peace of their newfound happiness lasted exactly 3 days. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard the horses approaching, too many to be friendly visitors. She recognized Frank Slater's bay stallion in the lead, flanked by his usual crew of hired thugs. Her hands tightened on the wet sheet she was holding, but she forced herself to continue working as if unconcerned. Jesse emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but held casually. not quite threatening. "Frank, boys, something I can help you with?" "Just checking on how our little experiment is working out," Frank said, dismounting with studied laziness. His eyes found Clara, raking over her with insulting familiarity. "Surprised to see you're still here, Miss Whitmore. Most ladies would have run screaming by now." "Then perhaps I'm not most ladies," Clara replied evenly, continuing to pin clothes to the line. "Or perhaps you're just desperate enough to bed down with anything that'll have you." Frank's smile was ugly. "Even a scarred-up cripple." Jessie took a step forward, but Clara's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Slater, if you have business here, state it. Otherwise, you're trespassing." "Trespassing?" Frank laughed. "Little girl, you don't even belong here. This is between men." "This little girl is the woman of this house," Clara said, finally turning to face him fully. "And in case you've forgotten, that gives me every right to order you off our property." Pete Hutchins snickered from his horse. "Woman of the house, that what they're calling it these days?" Jessie's rifle shifted slightly. "Watch your mouth, Pete." "Or what, McCrae? You'll shoot us all? With that shaky hand of yours?" Frank stepped closer. "Face it, you can barely keep this pathetic ranch running. What happens when winter really sets in? When you can't get to town for supplies because that leg of yours gives out? You think she'll stick around when the food runs out?" "We'll manage," Jessie said quietly. "Sure you will." Frank's voice dripped false concern. "Tell you what, I'm feeling generous. I'll give you $500 for this place. Cash money. You and your woman can start fresh somewhere else. Maybe California, where nobody knows what you really are. Not interested? 600? The answer's no. Frank, today, tomorrow, and every day after." Frank's mask of civility slipped. "You think you're better than me, don't you? Always have. Looking down your nose like you've got some moral high ground to stand on." "I know what your cousin did," Jessie said quietly. "I know where your family's money came from." The silence stretched taut. Frank's hand drifted toward his gun. "Careful. McCrae, accidents happen out here. Awful easy for a cripple to fall and break his neck. And women, well, women disappear all the time." Clara stepped forward, placing herself partially between the men. "Mr. Slater, I believe my husband asked you to leave." "Husband?" Frank's eyebrows rose. Well, when did this happy event occur?" "That's none of your concern," Clara said firmly, though her heart raced at the lie. They hadn't made it to town yet, hadn't stood before the preacher. But she'd be damned if she'd let this man know that. Frank studied them both, his smile returning. "I see. Well then, congratulations are in order, I suppose, boys. Let's leave the happy couple to their domestic bliss." As they mounted up, Frank turned back. "You know, McCrae, winter's coming on fast. Be a real shame if something happened to your hay stores, or your well got fouled, or your cattle started dying off mysterious-like." "That sounds like a threat. Frank." "Threat? No, just observing how dangerous ranching can be, especially when a man doesn't have friends to help him out." He touched his hat mockingly toward Clara. "Ma'am." They watched the riders disappear over the ridge. Only then did Clara realize she was shaking. Jessie's arm came around her, solid and warm. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have sold out years ago. Should never have dragged you into this." Clara turned in his arms, gripping his shoulders. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare apologize for standing up to bullies. This is our home, and we're not letting anyone drive us off." That night, they took turns keeping watch. Clara insisted on taking a shift despite Jessie's protests, sitting at the window with the rifle across her lap. The moon was new, leaving the ranch yard in deep darkness that could hide any number of threats. Jessie couldn't sleep, finally joining her at the window. "You should rest." "So should you." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his presence. "Do you think he'll really try something?" "Frank's a coward at heart. He prefers to hire others to do his dirty work." Jessie's jaw tightened. "But yes, I think he'll try something." They didn't have long to wait. 3 nights later, Clara woke to the acrid smell of smoke. "Jesse, fire!" They rushed outside to find the hay barn ablaze. While Jesse fought to contain the fire, Clara ran to free the horses from the nearby stable. The flames leaped high into the night sky, visible for miles, a declaration of war written in smoke and ember. By dawn, the barn was a smoking ruin. Half their winter hay was gone, and Jesse's hands were blistered from fighting the flames. Clara tended his burns with gentle efficiency, neither of them stating the obvious. Without enough hay, they'd have to sell off most of the cattle or watch them starve come winter. "We could go to the sheriff," Clara suggested as she wrapped clean bandages around his hands. Jesse's laugh was bitter. "Sheriff Daniels is Frank's cousin by marriage. Nothing would come of it except more trouble." A knock at the door interrupted them. Clara grabbed the rifle before opening it, finding Martha Watson, their nearest neighbor, on the porch. The older woman's weathered face was creased with concern. "Saw the smoke," Martha said simply. "Figured you might need some help." She'd brought her grown sons, Tom and Charles, and a wagon loaded with supplies. As the morning progressed, other neighbors arrived. The Millers, the Johnsons, even old Samuel Chen from the other side of the valley. People Jesse had barely spoken to in years, coming to help. "Don't look so surprised," Martha told him as her boys helped clear the burned debris. "Frank Slater's made enemies of half the valley with his high-handed ways. Folks are tired of it. Besides," she glanced at Clara with approval, "about time you had a proper woman here. Place already looks better." They worked through the day, salvaging what they could and shoring up the remaining structures. The Watsons promised to sell Jesse some of their extra hay at a fair price, and Samuel Chen offered the loan of his bull for breeding come spring. As the sun set and the neighbors departed, Clara stood with Jesse surveying their domain. It looked wounded but not defeated. "Like us," she thought. "They came," Jesse said, wonder in his voice. "I never thought. I've kept to myself so long." "You gave them a reason to come," Clara corrected. "By standing up to Frank, by showing that bullies can be faced down." That night, as they lay in bed, Jesse pulled her close. "We need to make it official. Tomorrow, I want you protected legally if anything happens to me." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Clara said fiercely. "Promise me?" "I promise. Tomorrow." She kissed him, tasting smoke and determination. "But Jesse, nothing's going to happen to either of us. We're going to fight, and we're going to win." Jesse's response was wordless, showing her with touch what words couldn't convey: gratitude, desire, and something deeper than both. They came together with new urgency, the threat against their home adding desperation to their passion. Each caress was a promise, each kiss a vow that whatever came, they would face it together. Later, as Jesse slept, Clara stood at the window again, keeping watch. The stars were brilliant in the cold sky, and the mountains stood eternal and untroubled by human conflicts. But in the valley below, she knew Frank Slater was planning his next move. Let him come, she thought. He'd learned that a woman who'd survived poverty, betrayal, and loss was not so easily frightened, and a man who'd survived war and isolation had more strength than anyone guessed. Tomorrow they would stand before the preacher and make their union official. But tonight, in all the ways that truly mattered, they were already bound. By shared danger, by chosen love, and by the determination to build something worth defending in this harsh and beautiful land. The burned barn stood like a black skeleton against the stars, a reminder of the battle lines drawn. But Clara smiled grimly as she settled back into bed beside Jesse. Frank Slater had made a crucial error. He'd given them an enemy to unite against, and in doing so, had transformed two damaged souls into something far more dangerous. A partnership forged in fire and tempered by love. The war for their home had begun. But Clara had no doubt about the outcome. They would win, because they had something Frank, with all his money and men, could never understand. They had each other, and that was worth any fight. Clara's feet ached with each step on the frozen ground as she made her way toward town. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around her like a shroud, and her breath formed small clouds in the bitter air. She'd left while Jesse slept, unable to face another argument after their explosive confrontation the night before. The memory of it still stung. Jesse finding the marriage certificate that Martha Watson had quietly given her, his face darkening as he read the banker's note attached, explaining that without legal marriage, Clara would have no claim to the ranch if something happened to Jesse. "You're planning to marry me for the land?" His voice had been deadly quiet, worse than if he'd shouted, "Jesse, no, that's not... All this time, I thought, God, what a fool I've been." He'd crushed the paper in his fist. Was any of it real, Clara? Or was I just the best opportunity available to a desperate woman? She'd tried to explain, tried to make him understand that Martha had approached her, that she'd been unsure how to bring it up without it seeming calculated. But Jesse's walls had slammed back into place, higher and thicker than ever. He'd slept in the barn, leaving her alone in the house they'd shared so warmly just days before. Now, trudging through the darkness toward town, Clara fought back tears that would only freeze on her cheeks. She'd left a note, brief, final. She wouldn't stay where she wasn't trusted. Better to leave with some dignity intact than to watch their love crumble into bitter recrimination. The Watson ranch appeared through the gloom, windows glowing with lamplight. Clara hesitated, then knocked. Martha answered quickly, as if she'd been awake and waiting. "Clara, child, what on earth? Come in, you're half frozen." Soon Clara was wrapped in quilts beside Martha's kitchen fire, a cup of hot coffee warming her hands. The older woman studied her shrewdly. "Had a fight with that stubborn fool. Did you?" Clara nodded miserably. "He thinks I'm after his land, that I'm using him." Martha snorted. "Men, quick to passion, slow to sense. Jesse McCrae's been alone so long he's forgotten how to trust good fortune when it smacks him in the face. I can't go back. Not after the things he said." "Can't or won't." Martha refilled Clara's cup. "Pride's a cold bedfellow. Girl, colder than Montana winter." They sat in silence as the sun began to rise, painting the mountains pink and gold. Finally, Martha spoke again. "You can stay here a few days. But Clara, that man loves you something fierce. I've known Jesse since he came back from the war. Never seen him look at anything the way he looks at you. Fear makes fools of us all sometimes." In the cold barn of the McCrae ranch, Jesse woke to silence. The absence of Clara's quiet morning sounds, the scrape of the stove lid, the whisper of her skirts, her soft humming, hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled into the house, finding her note on the table. "Jesse, I won't stay where I'm not trusted. I'm sorry for any misunderstanding. I wish you well." See. He sank into a chair, the paper trembling in his hands. The marriage certificate still lay crumpled where he'd thrown it, and he smoothed it out with shaking fingers. Reading it again without the haze of anger, he saw what he'd missed. Martha's note wasn't suggesting Clara marry him for the land. It was warning that without protection, Clara would be vulnerable if Frank Slater made good on his threats. "God Almighty," he whispered. "What have I done?" He hitched up the wagon despite his protesting leg, driving toward town with desperate urgency. She couldn't have gotten far on foot. He'd find her, apologize, make her understand, but the road was empty, and inquiries in town yielded nothing. The hotel hadn't seen her. The stage office reported no passengers. Growing frantic, Jesse finally thought to check with the Watsons. Martha met him at the door, her expression stern. "She's here, and she's hurting something awful. Jesse McCrae. I need to see her, to explain." "Do you now?" Martha crossed her arms. "And what exactly do you plan to explain? How you accused her of being a gold digger? How you threw her love back in her face the first time you felt uncertain?" Jesse's shoulders sagged. "I was wrong. I know that. But Martha, you have to understand. Everyone I've ever trusted has betrayed me. My own unit, the town, even my faith in myself. When I saw that paper, all I could think was that it was happening again." Martha's expression softened slightly. "Fear's understandable. Jesse, But you can't build a life on it. That girl gave up everything to stand by you. She's faced down Frank Slater, worked herself raw on your ranch, shared your bed and your dreams. If that's not proof enough of her character, then you don't deserve her." "I know." His voice was raw. "God help me. I know. Please, just let me talk to her." After a long moment, Martha stepped aside. "She's in the kitchen. Mind you don't make things worse." Clara sat at Martha's table, a half-eaten breakfast before her. She looked up when Jesse entered, and he saw the pain in her eyes, pain he'd put there. She started to rise, but he held up a hand. "Please, just let me say this." He fumbled for words. This man who'd never learned the art of pretty speeches. "Clara, I'm a fool. Worse than a fool. You've given me nothing but kindness and honesty since the day you arrived, and I repaid it with suspicion and cruel words." Clara remained silent, waiting. "The war? What happened to me? It broke something inside, made me see enemies everywhere, expect betrayal at every turn. When I saw that paper, all my old fears came rushing back, but that's not excuse enough." He moved closer, his leg dragging more than usual. "You asked me once if I trusted you, and I said yes. Then at the first test, I failed you. Failed us." "Yes," Clara said quietly. "You did." Jesse flinched but continued. "I can't promise I won't be a fool again. Can't promise my demons won't rise up and make me stupid. But Clara, I can promise this. I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life. You brought me back from the dead, made me believe I could be more than a scarred, bitter hermit. If you leave, you'll take all the light with you." Tears tracked down Clara's cheeks. "How can I trust that the next time something scares you, you won't push me away again?" "You can't." Jesse's honesty was painful. "All I can do is swear to try, to fight those fears instead of giving in to them, to remember that you chose to stay when everyone expected you to run, to have faith in us, even when having faith in anything goes against every instinct I've got left." They stood frozen, the kitchen bright with morning sun, the weight of decision hanging between them. Finally, Clara spoke. "I didn't want the paper for the land, Jesse. I wanted it because I was afraid that if something happened to you, Frank would throw me off the ranch before your body was cold. Afraid of losing not just you, but the only real home I've ever known." "I know. I see that now." Jesse risked a step closer. "We're a pair, aren't we? Both so scared of losing what we've found that we nearly threw it away ourselves." A sound escaped Clara, half laugh, half sob. "What a mess we are. But our mess," Jesse said hopefully. "If you'll still have me, if you can forgive a broken-down soldier who sometimes lets his wounds speak louder than his heart." Clara stood slowly, studying his face, the scars, the hope, the love that he'd never quite learned to hide. "Promise me something, Jesse. Promise that next time you're afraid, you'll tell me, that we'll face it together instead of turning on each other. I promise." He held out his hand, scarred and calloused from work. "Come home, Clara. Nothing's right without you there." After a long moment, she took his hand. Jesse pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, breathing apologies and endearments against her neck. Martha bustled past them, muttering about folks conducting their courting in her kitchen. But Clara caught her smile. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a healing quiet. Jesse kept Clara's hand in his when the road allowed, as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. As their home came into view, Clara felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that for all their flaws and fears, this was where she belonged. That evening, as she prepared dinner and Jesse mended harness at the table, their familiar routine restored, he spoke suddenly. "Tomorrow. We go to town tomorrow and see the preacher. No more delays. No more excuses. I want you as my wife before God and law. Clara Whitmore. Will you have me?" Clara set down her cooking spoon and came to stand before him. "Yes, Jesse McCrae. I'll have you. Scars, fears, stubborn pride, and all." He pulled her onto his lap, kissing her with desperate gratitude. When they parted, both breathing hard. Clara saw his eyes were wet. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not," she agreed with a small smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway, for better or worse. Remember? For better or worse," he repeated, like a vow. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. But inside, by the fire, two wounded souls continued the slow work of learning to trust in love. Imperfect, sometimes painful, but worth every struggle for the warmth it brought to the cold Montana nights. Spring arrived late that year, but when it came, it transformed the valley into a paradise of wildflowers and new grass. Clara stood in what had become her garden, hands deep in the rich soil, planting the seeds she'd ordered from back east. The wedding ring on her finger caught the sunlight, a simple gold band that Jesse had produced from his mother's belongings, worn smooth by years but perfect in its simplicity. They'd been married 4 months now, through the worst of winter, and had emerged stronger for it. The small ceremony in town had been witnessed by the Watsons and a handful of other neighbors who'd become friends. Even the preacher had seemed moved by the quiet joy that radiated from the couple who'd found each other against all odds. "Looks good," Jesse said. Approaching from the barn, he moved easier these days, whether from the warming weather or from the liniment Clara rubbed into his leg each night. "Though I still say flowers are a waste of good planting space." Clara threw a dirt clod at him, which he dodged with a grin. "Man cannot live by vegetables alone. Jesse McCrae, besides, you didn't complain when I brought you those wildflowers last week. That's different." He came up behind her, arms encircling her waist. "Those were from you." She leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth of his chest. These quiet moments of affection, once so hard won, now came as naturally as breathing. "Help me with the fence around the garden. I want to get it up before the deer discover what I've planted." They worked together through the morning, Jesse cutting posts while Clara strung wire. The ranch had transformed over the winter, not just in the physical improvements they'd made, but in the feeling of the place. What had once been a hermit's hideaway now felt like a home, alive with possibility. "Ryder's coming," Jesse said suddenly, shading his eyes against the sun. Clara felt the familiar tension, but it eased when she recognized Samuel Chen's distinctive hat. The elderly Chinese man had become a regular visitor, trading vegetables from his extensive garden for Clara's preserved meats and Jesse's help with heavy work. "Good morning, Samuel," Clara called out as he approached. "Mrs. McCrae, Mr. McCrae." Samuel dismounted with the care of age. "I bring news from town. Not good news, I think." Jesse and Clara exchanged glances. "What's happened?" "Frank Slater. He's bought the Murphy place upstream. Plans to dam the creek. His men say, for a new cattle operation." The blood drained from Clara's face. Silver Creek ran through the Murphy property before reaching their land. Without it, their ranch would die of thirst in the summer heat. "He can't do that," Jesse said flatly. "Water rights were never properly filed." Samuel interrupted gently. "I checked at the courthouse. Your father, Jesse, he never made it official. In those days, no one thought it necessary." Clara grabbed Jesse's arm as he swayed slightly. The creek was their lifeline. For the cattle, for her garden, for the house itself. Without it. "Thank you for telling us, Samuel," Clara managed. "Will you stay for coffee?" No, you have much to discuss." The old man remounted. "But remember, you have friends now. We stand together." "Yes." After he left, Jesse sank onto the porch steps, head in his hands. "He's won. Without water, we can't survive the summer." "Stop that." Clara sat beside him, her mind racing. "We're not giving up. There has to be something we can do." "What? File a complaint with his cousin the sheriff? Take him to court with money we don't have?" Jesse's voice was bitter. "Face it, Clara. He's been planning this all along. The fire was just the opening move." Clara stood abruptly. "Then we plan too, starting with finding another water source." "There isn't one. My father searched for years. Your father didn't have me. Clara interrupted. Or the Watsons. Or Samuel. Or any of the others who've come to call us friends. Jesse, we're not alone anymore. Stop acting like we are. That evening, their kitchen filled with neighbors. Word had spread quickly. Frank Slater's latest move affected them all. If he could choke off one ranch's water, what would stop him from doing it to others? There's an old stream bed runs down from Hawks Peak, Tom Watson said, studying Jesse's rough map of the area. Been dry since I was a boy, but the spring that fed it might still be there. That's 4 miles of rough country. His brother Charles added. Would take weeks to dig a channel, if the spring's even flowing. We've got weeks, Martha Watson said firmly. Question is, do we have the will? One by one, the others voiced their support. The Millers, the Johnsons, even families who'd barely spoken to Jesse before his marriage. Clara watched her husband's face transform as he realized the truth. He was no longer the valley's outcast. He was one of them. Plans were made. The men would take turns helping dig the new channel while the women organized food and supplies. It would be brutally hard work, racing against the summer heat, but it was hope. That night, as Clara and Jesse lay entwined in their bed, he pulled her close. You did this, he murmured against her hair. Brought them here, made them care. No, Clara corrected softly. You did. By being worth caring about, I just helped them see it. Jesse's response was wordless, showing her with touch what words couldn't convey. Their lovemaking had evolved from those first desperate couplings into something deeper, still passionate, but tempered with tenderness and the security of committed love. Clara had discovered a sensual side of herself she'd never suspected, delighting in the power she held over this strong, scarred man who came apart at her touch. Afterward, as Jesse slept, Clara stared at the ceiling and planned. The water channel was only part of the solution. Frank Slater wouldn't stop until he'd driven them out or destroyed them. They needed leverage, something to make him back down. The next weeks passed in a blur of back-breaking labor. The men worked in shifts, digging through rocky soil and stubborn roots. Clara and the other women kept them fed and hydrated, treating blistered hands and sunburned necks. Slowly, painfully, a channel began to take shape. Jesse drove himself hardest of all, ignoring his legs' protests until Clara threatened to tie him to the bed if he didn't rest. She'd never seen him like this, determined not just to save their ranch, but to prove worthy of the community's faith. It was Martha who made the discovery that changed everything. She'd gone to town for supplies and stopped at the courthouse to research water rights. What she found sent her racing back to the ranch. Jesse, Clara, look at this. She spread yellowed papers on their kitchen table. Frank Slater's deed to the Murphy place. See the description of the property line. Clara studied it, frowning. It says the eastern border runs along... Wait, that can't be right. It is, though. I checked it 3 times. Martha's eyes gleamed. According to this, Frank doesn't own the section where the creek runs. Old Murphy made a surveying error 40 years ago, and nobody ever caught it. Jesse grabbed the paper, reading it again. Then who owns it? Nobody. It's unclaimed government land. Martha grinned. Free for homesteading by any American citizen, or their spouse. Clara's breath caught. I could file a claim. As Mrs. Jessie McCrae, legal resident of Montana Territory, you surely could. Martha pulled out another paper. I took the liberty of getting the forms. They raced to town that very afternoon, Clara's hands shaking as she filled out the homestead claim. The clerk, thankfully, was not one of Frank's cronies, a recent arrival who processed the claim with bored efficiency. When Frank Slater arrived at the courthouse the next day to file his water rights, he discovered that the crucial strip of land containing Silver Creek now belonged to Mrs. Clara McCrae. His roar of rage could be heard clear down Main Street. The confrontation came 2 days later. Clara was alone at the ranch, Jesse and the other men working on the channel. When Frank's carriage rolled up, she met him on the porch, rifle prominently displayed. Mrs. McCrae. Frank's voice was silk over steel. "I believe we need to discuss our mutual interests. I wasn't aware we had any, Mr. Slater. Come now. We both know that homestead claim is a technicality, hardly sporting to take advantage of an old surveying error." Clara smiled coldly. "As sporting as burning a man's barn, or trying to steal his water?" Frank's mask slipped. "Name your price. $1,000. $2,000. Mr. Slater, there isn't enough money in Montana to buy that land. Silver Creek stays free for everyone in this valley who's always depended on it." "You're making a dangerous enemy, girl." "I already had one." Clara stood taller. "Difference is, now I have the law on my side. And friends? Lots of friends who are tired of your bullying." Frank stepped closer, and Clara's finger moved to the trigger. He stopped, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "You're tougher than you look. Mrs. McCrae, I'll give you that." He turned to go, then paused. "This isn't over." "No," Clara agreed. "But your days of running roughshod over this valley are, count on it." As his carriage rolled away, Clara's knees finally gave out. She sank into the porch chair, shaking with delayed reaction. But she was smiling. They'd won this round, secured their water and their future. When Jesse came home that evening, dusty and exhausted from digging, Clara met him with the news. He swung her around in a circle, whooping like a boy, then kissed her soundly. "My brilliant, brave wife," he said against her lips. "Remind me never to get on your bad side. Just keep loving me, Jesse McCrae, and you'll be fine." He set her down gently, his expression growing serious. "Forever, Clara, that's a promise." As spring turned toward summer, the new channel neared completion, and the garden burst with growth. The ranch thrived, and with it, the love between two people who'd found in each other not just passion, but partnership. Frank Slater's shadow still loomed, but it no longer seemed as dark. Together, they'd face whatever came. Rooted as deeply in this land as the flowers Clara had planted, beautiful, resilient, and impossible to destroy. The smoke was visible from 2 miles away, a black column rising into the summer sky like an accusation. Jesse spurred his horse harder, Clara clinging tight behind him, her heart hammering against his back. They'd been in town when young Tom Watson had come riding hard, shouting that the McCrae ranch was burning. But as they crested the final ridge, Clara gasped in relief. It wasn't their house aflame. It was the new barn they'd just finished building. The house stood untouched, though smoke damage would likely blacken its walls. Their neighbors were already forming bucket brigades, fighting to keep the flames from spreading. "Thank God," Jesse breathed, sliding from the saddle and helping Clara down. "Just the barn." "Just the barn?" Clara's voice shook with fury. "We spent 2 months building that barn. Every penny we'd saved, every favor we could call in." Her fists clenched. "This time, Frank Slater's gone too far." As if summoned by his name, Slater himself appeared through the smoke, mounted on his bay stallion, his ranch hands flanking him. He surveyed the scene with theatrical shock. "Terrible tragedy. McCrae," he called out. "These summer fires, they spread so fast. Lucky your house was spared." Jesse started forward, but Clara caught his arm. "No, that's what he wants." She raised her voice. "Mr. Slater, how fortunate you happen to be in the area with all your men in the middle of a workday." Frank's smile faltered. "We saw the smoke, came to help." "Then help," Martha Watson challenged, appearing at Clara's shoulder. "Grab a bucket. We need to check on our own property. Make sure the fire doesn't spread that direction." Frank wheeled his horse around. "Boys, let's ride." As they galloped away, Sheriff Daniels arrived, late, as always when the McCraes were involved. He surveyed the damage with calculated indifference. "Any idea how it started?" "Found this," Charles Watson said, holding up a kerosene-soaked rag. 3 more like it around the barn's foundation." The sheriff barely glanced at the evidence. Could have been anyone. Drifter, maybe. Indians. No way to prove otherwise. He tipped his hat mockingly. "I'll file a report." After he left, The crowd of neighbors stood in angry silence. The barn was a total loss. Smoking beams and ashes, all that remained of their hard work. "We'll rebuild," Tom Watson said firmly. "Soon as you're ready. Jesse, we'll all come back." "Can't ask you to do that again," Jesse said quietly. "You're not asking. We're offering." Samuel Chen stepped forward. "But first, I think we deal with Mr. Slater." "Yes?" Clara looked around at the faces surrounding them. Weathered, work-worn faces set with determination. "What did you have in mind?" Old Samuel smiled. "In my country, we have saying, the tallest tree catches the most wind. Mr. Slater has grown very tall. Perhaps time someone checks how deep his roots really go." Over the next days, a quiet investigation began. Martha Watson, with her talent for gossip and her cousin who worked at the bank, discovered irregularities in Frank's cattle sales. Tom and Charles, drinking at the saloon, overheard Frank's men bragging about midnight work that paid extra. Samuel's nephew in Denver sent word that Frank had been selling cattle there, far more than his reported herd could account for. "He's been stealing," Clara said, studying the gathered information. "Altering brands, selling his neighbor's cattle as his own. For years, probably," Jesse agreed. "But proving it, we don't need to prove it in court," Martha interrupted. "We just need to prove it to the Cattlemen's Association. They have their own ways of dealing with rustlers." Jesse looked uncomfortable. "I don't like vigilante justice, Martha." "Neither do I, but the laws failed us. Frank owns the sheriff, has the judge in his pocket. Sometimes, Jesse, you have to fight outside the rules when the rules are rigged against you." That night, as they prepared for bed, Clara noticed Jesse's hands shaking as he unbuttoned his shirt. She went to him, covering his hands with hers. "What is it?" "I swore after the war I'd never be part of mob justice again." His voice was raw. "Saw too much of it. Good men turned into animals, taking law into their own hands." Clara cupped his scarred face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "This isn't the same. We're not talking about hanging Frank from the nearest tree, just exposing his crimes to people who can stop him legally. It's a thin line, Clara." "I know, but Jesse, he burned our barn. He tried to steal our water. He won't stop until we're destroyed or gone." She pressed closer to him. "I won't let him win. I won't let him take this life we've built." Jesse pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. They stood like that for long moments before he spoke. "The association meets in Billings next week. I know the president. Fought with him in the war. He's an honest man. You'll go? We'll go, together." He pulled back to look at her. "But Clara, if this doesn't work, we need to consider—" "No," her voice was steel. "We're not running. This is our home." Their lovemaking that night had an edge of desperation, as if they were storing up sensation against an uncertain future. Clara had learned her husband's body like a cherished map, every scar, every sensitive spot, every way to make him groan her name like a prayer. Jesse worshipped her in return, his hands and mouth bringing her to heights that left her trembling and amazed that such pleasure was possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin. Outside, coyotes howled in the hills, and the wind carried the lingering scent of smoke from their burned barn. "Whatever happens," Jesse murmured, "I want you to know, these months with you have been worth everything. Worth a dozen barns. Worth the whole ranch." Clara raised up on her elbow, her hair falling like a curtain around them. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me, Jesse McCrae." "We're going to fight, and we're going to win. And we're going to raise children in this house and grow old on this land. Do you hear me?" He pulled her down for a fierce kiss. "I hear you." The trip to Billings took 3 days. They presented their evidence to the Cattlemen's Association president, Major Harrison, who listened with growing anger. Jesse's war record carried weight, as did the supporting testimony from their neighbors who'd made the journey with them. "Frank Slater," Harrison said finally, "has been suspected before, but never with proof. This," he gestured at the papers, "this is enough to start a formal investigation. And in the meantime, he'll find his credit dried up, his contracts canceled. The association doesn't tolerate rustlers, no matter how big they think they are. On the ride home, Clara felt hope blooming in her chest. But as they approached their valley, they saw smoke again. Not black this time, but the white smoke of campfires. Lots of them. Their yard was full of wagons, tents, and people. Every neighbor for 20 miles had come, bringing lumber, tools, and determination where their barn had stood. A new foundation was already taking shape. "Thought we'd get started while you were gone," Martha Watson said, grinning at their shocked faces. "Frank Slater's not the only one who can organize crews." Jesse dismounted slowly, looking around in wonder. We can't repay all this?" "Sure you can," Tom Watson said. By standing up to bullies, by showing us all that some things are worth fighting for." Clara was crying openly now, overwhelmed by this display of community. Jesse's arm came around her, solid and sure. The barn raising lasted 3 days. By the end, they had a structure even better than the one that had burned. Larger, stronger, with improvements suggested by a dozen experienced ranchers. Frank Slater rode by once, saw the crowd, and turned back without a word. That night, as Clara and Jesse stood before their new barn, she felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that they'd turned a corner. Frank's power was broken, his crimes exposed, his influence waning. "We did it," she whispered. "No," Jesse corrected, pulling her close. "We all did it, together." As if to seal their triumph, Clara felt a flutter in her belly that had nothing to do with nerves. She'd suspected for weeks but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was sure. Now, with their future secured and their community around them, the time seemed right. "Jesse," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach, "I have something to tell you." His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Clara, are you—" "Yes," she smiled through fresh tears. "Come spring, there'll be 3 of us on this ranch." Jesse let out a whoop that echoed off the mountains, then swung her up in his arms, spinning her around as he had that day when she'd secured their water rights. But this time, his joy was mixed with awe, with reverence for the miracle of new life. They were still standing there, wrapped in each other's arms and their dreams of the future, when the sun set behind the mountains. The burned ground where their first barn had stood was already being reclaimed by prairie grass, green shoots pushing through the ash. Nature's promise that from destruction comes renewal, from pain comes growth. 9 months later, when Clara's labor pains began, half the valley's women crowded into their house to help. Martha Watson delivered the baby, a son with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. They named him Samuel Thomas, after the neighbors who'd become family. As Jesse held his son for the first time, his scarred face soft with wonder. Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. A cruel joke meant to humiliate them had become the greatest gift of their lives. 2 broken souls had found healing in each other's arms, and in the process had helped heal a community divided by fear and greed. Frank Slater left the valley that fall. His ranch sold to pay debts and settlements. The new owner was a fair man who honored water rights and worked with his neighbors instead of against them. Peace settled over the valley like snow, soft and clean and full of promise. Years passed. The McCrae Ranch prospered, becoming a gathering place for the community that had saved it. Children played in Clara's flower garden, now expanded to include roses and fruit trees. Jesse's limp became less pronounced, eased by love and the knowledge that he was no longer fighting his battles alone. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their son chase chickens while their daughter napped in Clara's arms, Jesse took his wife's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming here? Choosing this life?" Clara looked around at their children, their thriving ranch, the mountains standing eternal guard over their valley. Then she looked at her husband, this good man who'd survived war and isolation to become the heart of their community. "Never," she said simply. "This is home." And in the setting sun that painted their world in shades of gold and rose, Two souls who'd found each other against all odds continued their dance of love and partnership. Proof that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as disasters, and the strongest foundations are built on the ashes of what came before. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the Wild West, where love blooms even in the harshest conditions. I hope Jesse and Clara's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening to this tale tonight? Let us know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from listeners, whether you're by a cozy fireplace, on a long drive, or perhaps even under the western stars. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of courage, romance, and adventure from the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Clara and Jesse's journey. Did their love story inspire you? Until next time, partners, keep the campfire burning and the stories flowing.